good afternoon. Hopefully everybody had a nice lunch. We're going to change the viewpoint a little bit. Not talking about bits and bytes and little switches, but we're going to expand it into the enterprise world. My name is Sverrir Jonsson. I'm an enterprise architect with my own company, Net-Innovate Solutions. My life I spent in other big companies doing networking, but also an enterprise architect. So some of the stuff that we talked about, I've been there, I've done that, but let's move on. It's important to think about networking in much bigger scale or brighter than just the LAN or the data center LAN that I've been focused on all morning, this afternoon. It's from an enterprise standpoint, it's a lot more than that. It's about being able to connect all your sites, all your users, your known users that need to be able to connect to a trusted applications. And how that happens needs to be managed, needs to be taken into consideration. We heard this morning some discussions on the keynotes about the data center and about the edge and about the client, but nobody talked about how to bring all these together. And that's where enterprise networking comes into place. We talk about, this is based on work that I've done for my previous company, and also that what we are talking about nowadays. It's not about software-defined LAN or software-defined WAN. We need to talk about software-defined connectivity. And we need to, and for this, we need to adapt some stringent processes to be able to do this successfully. And so we like to apply the DevSecFinOps paradigm to managing networks. But we need to expand it also to include the FinOps, the financial operations. And the financial operations, we need to expand it to include the supply chain. And that's where the white label switches, what we talked about earlier, for example, from EdgeCore, come into place. If we don't add all of these components into the picture, we will not be able to manage the complete stack of networks, because it's a lot more. If you see here on the screen, zoning is just one part of the whole thing, or the LAN is just one domain in the big realm of enterprise networking. And it's this whole thing that needs to be taken into consideration, not just if you have a very high-performant LAN in your data center, but that's just that. This is the whole stack. You need to look at the connectivity. You need to look at the security, the distribution between different sites, the WAN. You need to look at the access, how the users access your systems, the zero trust network access. All of these need to be looked at as one. Then we come back, so to kind of close the loop and come back to Sonic, where that comes in. Well, Sonic is not only viable in the data center, Sonic is also viable on the edge. And so being able to have an open source, freely available, and multi-vendor supported network on your local sites is very important, because this is, again, where then the supply chain comes into place. Why the importance of the supply chains, and to be able to have multiple vendors able to supply parts of your local site-based networks, because you have different vendors are favored in different locations, geographical locations. You might have Brazil is also a good example. There's a very expensive to get goods into Brazil, so Brazil might have a different set of equipment than some country in Asia. But you still need to be able to manage all of that from a single point. And if you have the different hardware vendors, and then you come back into this community, Sonic community we just discussed, if you can run that on top of these kinds of tools, you increase your flexibility and reduces your reliance on a single vendor. You don't have that lock-in anymore. And that's this with the right label switching. That it's kind of brings that into the picture, that you can switch any way you want it. You can use the different vendors and to get the flexibility. But you have to remember what I said earlier also, that the LAN is just a subset of the whole realm of connectivity. You need a different approach to manage everything. So you need to, that's where this DevSecFinOps comes into place. You need to be able to apply these rigorous processes that we know from software development, apply them to your networking connectivity. Make sure you use technologies like infrastructure code, or Terraform, for example, to define your networks, to configure your networks. And that's also very important from a compliance standpoint, because you can then always check in your code. You have the discipline from software development. You check in your code, and you can always say at a certain point in time, this is the configuration that was valid at the time. It also allows you to quickly and safely make changes to your environments. And with some of the features available within the Sonic and the Sonic Lab, you can also test your changes, test the configurations if you have a virtualized environment. So that's on the technical side. But the non-technical issues, non-technical requirements are just as important, when in some cases more important. Financial planning, making sure that the network costs are accounted for, that you know what the whole thing is costing. And very important is the business intent. You can, as a network specialist, design the cleverest network and the super high performance and everything. But does a business need it? I've seen examples of CIOs making a decision, well, this is the network that we're going to have. We're going to push it to all our sites. But do you need such almost a real-time 99.9% availability for connectivity when a business only requires to read their emails, which is asynchronous anyway? So it's a completely network, it's completely designed without really looking at the intent of the business, what the business really requires. So you need to know what are the business requirements, what's the business intent before you design your network. Another thing is serviceability and operations. We also briefly discussed earlier on day 2. How is it going to be serviced? Who is going to provide the services? All of that needs to be taken into consideration before you define your technical network. You need to know, is service going to be available? Is, again, supply chain. How does the RMI process work? Will I be able to get a new device in time? Well, if not, you have to architect it in. You have to make sure that, okay, I will not be able to get a new device within 24 hours. Then you must somehow create the architecture, high availability, that's possible. If you don't require it, well, you can save money. And that's why we say that the complexity of the enterprise networks is so great. And we have to extend the the traditional technology with both the FinOps and the supply chain, and to ensure you don't have the vendor lock-in. The resiliency in the supply chain is critical here. Yeah. And again, it's about the optimizing of the expenditures. Don't spend money where you don't have to. And nowadays, and that also has to do with some of the things that we talked about this morning, a lot was the sustainability, right? Don't overinvest. If you don't have to, don't overinvest. You know? And in order to avoid overinvestment, you again have to understand the business requirements and what the business really wants to do. There's one answer to all those questions that is architected in. Make sure that you don't just jump on a POC and let's configure some hardware and see if it works. That's just not the way enterprise works. You have to think about things. You have to look at what does the business do, what are the possible technologies, how are we going to service it, much does it cost, and you have to build that all into a cohesive architecture framework. So that's of course there are some architecture frameworks out there like the TOGAF, etc. But I'm not selling TOGAF, but some of the ideas behind that are still valid, and even in this environment. Look into the business. What is it doing? What's the technology? How are you going to service it? And what are the costs? Because as a network architect or network operations specialist, your best friend must be the controller, so that when you have your invoices, that they accept them. And so if you have planned things up front and everybody is aware of the cost, things are going to be much easier for your life. There's nothing worse than coming up at the end of a business of a financial year with a $2 million invoice. Oh, I forgot to budget that. Can you hide it somewhere? Not going to work. And we also have to, as part of all of this, we have to anticipate these shifts that are happening, and making sure we think about it. All of this AI stuff that we talked about this morning. Well, you might be doing AI or your companies might be doing AI and putting it into their products or into their business processes. Well, in order to do that, you have to make sure that they can connect from wherever the users are sitting to wherever your models are running, right? So if you only talk about data center network, some edge devices and clients without talking about the underlying connectivity, you have to make sure that you have infinite bandwidth from a standpoint of the user. The user doesn't need to know how much bandwidth there is. The user expects the network to be always there, and the connectivity should always be available. Well, somebody has to take care of that. And that is not just the data center, that is the whole chain, the whole stack. So, Net DevOps, we talked about that. Changes in security requirements, big thing, security postures. The move to, for example, for remote access, to move to a zero trust network access. It's big, a lot of companies done that. It saved a lot of companies during the pandemic to be able to switch from, to be able to give all the users access to all the applications within just days. That was, I know quite a few companies, one of the companies that I was working at, we did that just in a few days. We were able, tens of thousands of users to be able to work from home. That's the change in the way the networking functions, and also reduces the complexity of the network. Compliance. NIS2, European requirements, very, very big thing. Very few companies I've talked to in the last few months are really aware of NIS2 and what it means. NIS2 is a European compliance regulations that will take effect in October this year, and companies have to comply to it. there are, in Germany alone, there are 35,000 companies that need to apply, that need to get NIS2 compliance activated. And NIS2 is all about documentation, making sure that the big thing is documentation, and that the configurations are known, that you always know who has access to what at when, what time. In many cases, I've seen in some companies that lately that it's so purely documented that it's probably easier just to replace everything instead of just doing the documentation. Yeah. And that brings back to the architecture, architected in. You had to anticipate these changes. You have to think about them ahead of time. One point here on the last thing to think about is the digital twins of a network. Why do we need that? Well, that's again has to do with the brownfield approach. Amir from Beyond Networks will be here later. To be able to do a smooth transition, because we can't do a big truck update anymore. The controllers don't like it when you say, okay, let's buy one container full of switches and replace all the sites. It just doesn't work. If you have a company with 1,000 to 2,000, 3,000 sites, you can't do a big truck update. It has to be smooth and you have to plan it. And one of the solutions is the digital twin network. We'll hear about that from a Beyond Edge later. So the call to action is architected in. Make sure you go back and think about your architecture. Also, treat network like software. Use the principles and the disciplines from software development onto your network thinking. Use things like infrastructure as code. You can do all your POCs that we talked about earlier. Yeah, do that. But before you go into day one production, make sure you have it as a code so you can deploy it appropriately. And of course, we are always open for discussions. So if you have any questions, just let me know. And final word from Steve Jobs. Design is not just what it looks like and feels like. Design is how it works. So design your networks, your enterprise network completely, and not just the LAN, but the whole stack in the height and the width. All right? Questions?
Any questions? So thank you.